Hi, I'm Greg Dell with attorneys Dell and Schaefer, here with attorney Stephen Jessup. And I want to talk to you, Steve, about doctors who are filing for long-term disability, also obviously short-term disability. They obviously have real disabilities. They've been working with them for several months or maybe sometimes a year or two. However, they've been treating with other colleagues, friends, maybe another doctor in their same practice for their medical condition. And then they reach the point where they're like, wow, I really can't do this anymore. They give us a call and they don't have really documented medical support. So I want to talk about the issues this brings up and some ways that we can, get around this and ways that doctors who are considering filing disability know what to expect.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue is always going to be and doctors, obviously, they have a better understanding of medical conditions than most people, just in the line of profession. But when it comes to filing the claim, the insurance company, first and foremost, they're going to be looking at your medical records and what's in those. If you don't, have medical records, or they make it seem like you have a clean bill of health, there's no way you're going to get that claim approved. So there's a fine, delicate balancing act with doctors, especially if the condition is impairing them to the extent that it could be affecting their patient care. They're always afraid that if this shows up in my medical records, it could ruin my career because, a lot of doctors really, really have a hard time coming to terms quite often with the filing of disability.
Well, let's talk about, we represent tons of OBGYNs, ophthalmologists, cardiologists, general surgeons, all doctors who are performing, surgical procedures on patients. And basically they're like, well, okay, let's just use a neck or a back problem or something like that. They can't lean over the patient. They're maybe having some numbness or tingling in their hands, can't do any of these longer procedures or even short procedures. And they're like, if I put this in my medical record and God forbid I have a problem with the patient, the doctor feels like they're going to relate it back to my disability. Therefore, I committed malpractice. Now I'm getting sued. What do I do? So we understand that real life dynamic for the doctors about, how then do I have the medical support when in reality they call you and say, Steve, I've had this problem for a year with my neck. And you say, well, where's the beef? Where's the medical record? Well, I saw this doctor, I saw that doctor. So what other issue does that bring up along the lines of maybe credibility of the doctor?
Well, it brings up a lot. If you're going and to the doctor, you're asking if there's not something in a report, especially on an individual disability policy, and say, worst case scenario, you end up in litigation and depositions are going to be taken of the doctor, of the treating physicians or the doctors that they treated with. So it looks like they're trying to have it both ways. They want to be able to file this claim without any of the support, and it's like a situation where that's the insurance company, just trust me, I'm telling you the truth. So it really kind of undermines that credibility. And like in a situation you said with surgeons, where there is this idea of patient safety, patient care, an insurance company examiner is going to be thinking, well, you're telling me this, but you didn't really have these concerns for your patients if you were still continuing to do it. So how much should I believe you as an honest person? It's a really, really tough balancing act that the doctors face, especially when you're in a capacity of any type of surgical nature or an anesthesiologist where, there's really potential for life and death situations.
We see the same thing with the dentists, the chiropractors. What about the fact that, the doctor calls you, it's been about 6 months to a year, the doctor's been having problems, he might have even had an MRI, he knows what's going on, but he continues to work at the same capacity for the past year up until when he calls you?
That's one of the hardest things because the insurance company will say, well, we understand you have this condition. It's back to that idea that diagnosis doesn't equal disability. Yes, you have this condition, we see it, but you've continued to work, so what's changed? If you go cold turkey all of a sudden, it's going to be met with a lot of scrutiny by the insurance company as opposed to maybe trying to reduce the workload a little bit over the course of that time. It's not uncommon when doctors are sensitive of what will end up in their medical records, having it where their own doctor recommends, hey, if you're having these issues with pain and some tingling when you're in certain positions, why don't you see about reducing the workload a bit, see if that helps you to be able to prolong. Sets up, especially if the policy has residual or partial disability, sets up this idea of a reduction. Because a lot of doctors, if they can continue to work through it, they'll continue, and the policy, if it has residual, will pay them a proportionate benefit based on their loss of earnings. So it's really this act of showing that you've been trying all these different measures before you really have to pull the trigger and maybe go on full-blown total disability.
Okay, so here's one of the biggest things. We've obviously identified the problem. Let's talk about some of the advantages that I think doctors have when bringing these claims, even though they've been working through the ailment for a year. First of all, let's assume you're a doctor who does procedures on clients. Every procedure, for the most part, that involves some kind of surgery can result in some kind of error, which can be catastrophic to a potential claimant, can result in death, which is obviously catastrophic. So the risk is always very, very high for a doctor. So even though you may be a doctor who's been working through your condition for a year, when you finally reach that boiling point or the point where you go, you know what, I really wanted to hang on, I really wanted to try working for the past year or 2 years, and now I'm at the point where I can't do it, it's very hard for an insurance company to be the one to say, no, you know what, we think that you are not being honest or truthful, and we think you can get back into the operating room, or we think you should go do those procedures. And what I always say to the claimants is, why don't we tell the insurance company, okay, I'll go back in the operating room, I'll go back and do the procedures. You assume all liabilities for any errors that I make in the operating room or whatever procedure I'm doing. And you know there's no insurance company that's going to say, okay, if you go back to work, we'll assume all the risk for any malpractice that you commit. So that's a great thing for a doctor. That's a great thing for a jury. Everybody understands that. And then you even say to someone, are you going to let this doctor work on you who is disabled and can't do what they're doing? Obviously, they're going to say no. So that's a big advantage for physicians, any doctor that's working on a patient, is that you ultimately reach the point where you think it's not safe anymore. And yes, are they going to say, well, for the last year you were working, did you think it was safe? Well, how does a doctor answer that question?
Yeah.
I thought I could still do it. I was doing the best I could do. The other thing that you touched on was that a doctor goes to school for more than any other profession, basically, hands down, than there is. So a doctor goes to college, goes to med school, goes through residency, goes through a specialty. These doctors have been in school for 8 to 12 years before they even, basically get a paying job. Now they're in their career. Often we have doctors who are in their 50s and 60s, and doctors are working well into their 70s now, and they don't want to give up their careers. They love what they're doing.
It's part of who they are.
The other thing is the benefits are often significantly underinsured.
Horribly underinsured in most cases.
So there's no secondary gain incentive that a doctor wants to file for disability. That's a big advantage for a doctor. And can you describe what the secondary gain means?
Secondary gain, anytime you file a claim, especially on an individual disability product, the insurance company is going to, want to see, especially if you're in your own practice, your production reports, your financials. They're always looking for some reason why you may be filing for disability rather than just you're physically sick or ill, can't perform the job, whether your practice is failing, you have complaints against you with the your medical licensing board, any of these other ulterior motives. Secondary gain is, can you make more money on disability than if you were working? So there's always going to be that review, but like you said, it's quite often we're reviewing policies, and sometimes the doctors will have multiple, 4 or 5 policies, but when you add up the monthly benefit compared to what they were making, I mean, it's really a fraction of their pre-disability earnings. I mean, some of the only times you actually see a situation where they get somewhat close to what they used to make is if they were part of a group or worked for a hospital that had a group policy that was going to come out the bat paying them 60% of their pre-disability earnings and then adding on their private policies. So the insurance company isn't going to just look at this from an idea of what the medical is saying. They're also going to look at the facts and circumstances surrounding the filing of the claim to see if there's any other basis other than your condition that why you're actually filing the claim.
Right, and then the one last area I want to touch on, which is a big issue I see with a big majority of the doctors that call us, especially the dentists, the OBGYN practices, the chiropractors, is I'm not going to be able to work, but I've been doing this for 20, 25, 30 years. I want to try to sell my practice. Okay, well, how do you continue to work? How do you keep your practice alive? For how long can you do that and find a suitable buyer to come in? So now you got the situation where you're trying to keep the practice running just so you have something left to sell to somebody. But at the same time, you're continuing to work while disabled. So that is something we've worked with hundreds of doctors as to how do you go through that process of trying to salvage what you have to get your practice bought out, to maybe transition, to bring in another young associate to run your practice. Can you do that on your policy and still collect? These are all issues that we've handled all the time, plus the business overhead policies, that there's ways to sell your practice but still continue to maximize your business overhead policy and leverage that with a particular buyer. So all different issues. We've seen just about every kind of issue there is for any type of doctor, dentist, chiropractor looking to file a disability claim. Feel free to call any of our lawyers. We help doctors all over the country, no matter where you live. We always offer you a free initial phone consultation, and we look forward to the opportunity to speak with you.